How's it going, everybody? So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the importance of sleep and also some of the misconceptions about sleep deprivation and its effects on improving your fitness and things like health markers, blood sugar, heart disease risk, and a whole sort of other modalities that people generally insist you need a certain amount of sleep per day, or else you're basically doomed for negative outcomes. So, first and foremost, obviously, sleep is vitally important. You have to have some amount of sleep every single day, or not even every single day, but some amount of sleep intermittently over the course of your lifespan, or else bad things can happen to you. Now, the debate lies within how much sleep do we need, right? And first and foremost, most of you who are up to date on, I would say common sense, but it's more so critical thinking, and you follow people who are not completely full of crap. Basically, you understand that the number of hours we need of sleep every single day is dependent on the individual person. It's also dependent on your diet. Different types of food choices can impact how much sleep you need. There's a lot of people who follow ketogenic type of diets, and they notice they no longer need, as long of sleep as they used to in order to feel well rested. And there's a number of reasons why that might be. People who haven't really studied ketogenic metabolism in detail make the mistake of claiming that it's cortisol, and it's not that they need less sleep, it's just that their stress hormones are out of whack and they can't sleep because of the adrenaline and stuff like that. But in reality, that's not the case at all. It has more to do with NMDA signaling, the hormone that's responsible for wakeness, known as orexin. Definitely look that up if you haven't already, because orexin plays a vital role in all things related to sleep and wakefulness. But anyway, different nutritional factors and dietary patterns, as well as exercise habits, are going to impact how much sleep you need to feel well rested, first of all. And second of all, how much sleep you need to maintain health on a regular basis, okay? There's a lot of misconceptions that are not backed up by the research. So one of the main ones, and this is a big thing that I want to get across in this video. So first of all, most of the health problems and health conditions and diseases that many experts wrongfully blame on being worsened by low amounts of sleep, most of these claims are not actually found to be significantly backed up by the research. So for example, one of the big ones is you'll often hear, especially like in basic strength training, you'll hear people who if you're trying to be a power lifter or a professional athlete, or you're trying to gain strength, getting enough sleep is vitally important. And if you don't get the minimum amount of sleep, which, by the way, there's no real number, and the amount of sleep you need on a daily basis probably fluctuates. It's probably not the same amount of sleep every single day. But this arbitrary number of sleep that, experts say we need, or even for you as an individual, a lot of people wrongfully insist if you don't get that minimum amount of sleep necessary, then you're going to not be able to make strength gains at all. Some people just be like, oh, you can't recover from exercise if you don't sleep, which is not true. Your body doesn't just like magically enter a repair mode during the behavior of sleep. Sleep obviously improves the rate at which recovery processes work, depending on which cycle of sleep we're talking about, or which phase of sleep. But recovery processes from exercise are happening all the time, every time. Okay? Meaning within a minute after you finish your heavy squat session, your body's already initiating repair mechanisms. It's not just like damaged and not trying to repair itself until you magically get a certain amount of sleep or even get a certain amount of protein within a certain window. So these are all misconceptions on how basic homeostasis and metabolism actually works. So anyway, that's the first thing, is like you don't actually need a certain amount of sleep to recover from exercise. Your body's always recovering. And the amount of performance gains, the amount of adaptations you get from your training, we don't actually have data proving, and I mean proving, that running a couple hours low on sleep every single day is necessarily going to result in such significant negative impacts on your performance over the long term that you're going to be missing out on a shit ton of progress or something just because you missed some sleep. And this can be backed up by, number one, the fact that the majority, okay, not all, but the majority of professional athletes in most sports, especially sports that aren't as supported, and I live in America, so, you know, like football and I think baseball are pretty heavily supported by scholarships and by various kind of funding and things by the government that allows athletes to not need to, you know, like lose a bunch of sleep going to college and you know, cramming for exams, and then also working a part-time or full-time job to make enough money, blah, blah, blah. But of course, most of the college football players that I know lose a lot of sleep because they're partying and they're acting a fool, yet these are the people that eventually become NFL players anyway. But the majority of professional athletes in general, they start off working full-time jobs, if you know, especially in sports like mixed martial arts or you know, sports that are not heavily funded. CrossFit, you know, most like I hear a lot of the highest level CrossFit athletes before they become pro and they're sponsored and all that. So a lot of them, they work night shifts at hospitals as nurses and doctors and things. And so one of the best examples of this, I hear this all the time, but people are so caught up in an echo chamber that they don't see these things. But Austin Baraki and Dr. Jordan Fargenbaum, I don't know how to say his last name, from Barbell Medicine, they routinely talk about how, I mean, first of all, they have elite level squat, bench, and deadlift, okay? And they talk often about how some of the best training sessions of their life was taken part during 72 hours of no sleep. They're in medical residency and working overnight at like a hospital or whatever, doing internship or something. And a lot of times that's even without eating. So anyway, the point is, it's pretty clear in actual practical application in the real world, the impact that sleep has on your athletic performance. It definitely can impact your state of mind, but most athletes that get to the top, they have to struggle with sleep deprivation and train regardless. And oftentimes when they do this, as long as they're not so overly focused on their sleep patterns, usually they end up doing just fine and eventually reaching the top of the top. The bottom line is, number one, you're not always going to have optimal circumstances for health or for performance. And number two, you actually don't need optimal performance. And there's an argument to be made for a hormetic effect, where you put your body under that type of stress and it might actually get better adaptations due to the enhanced environment of sleep deprivation. And there actually is some evidence that the brain might supercompensate, if that's even actually a thing, supercompensation. And actually, have a greater rate of neurogenesis after recovering from sleep deprivation. So anyway, I'm just saying, in the world of athletics, where stress, recovery, and adaptation is literally the name of the game, this is the greatest test of how your body is responding to things like sleep deprivation and starvation and like the most stressful things. Because if your body is literally in a fight or flight mode and the hormonal effects of sleep deprivation are impacting your health, it should definitely impact your body's ability to adapt to exercise. Because the body needs to maintain survival and health first, and then exercise adaptations secondarily. So I'm just throwing that out there that, you see this all the time in athletics where people place a huge emphasis on how, if you don't sleep, you might as well just not train and shit like that. And that's not true. That's a good way to not make progress. That's actually one of the biggest differences between professional athletes and amateurs. People don't get anywhere. The people who are professionals, they train no matter how much sleep they have, and they prosper in spite of it. The other people, they just like, I'd rather get the extra sleep than actually train. And then, of course, they hear these sleep researchers say that that's a good idea, and that justifies their lack of training. So, anyway, furthermore, most of the research that we have on sleep deprivation and negative health outcomes suffers from reverse causation. So if you don't know what reverse causation is, definitely look it up. But basically, the people, and it's also unhealthy user bias, might be a better way to describe it. So basically, most of these studies are observational in nature. They are cohort studies, and they look at people who are free living and who are living a lifestyle that where they don't get a lot of sleep. And they're naturally living that lifestyle where they, by default, don't get enough sleep. And usually the people who don't get enough sleep, they're working night shifts. They're, either police officers, they're security guards, they're nurses, they're doctors, they're surgeons. They're working really long hours, okay? Usually they're working double shifts. They're in professions that are extremely demanding, usually. People that are sleep deprived and they're living a lifestyle where they're sleep deprived naturally, usually there is a reason why they're not sleeping. They're not willingly just like, I feel great, I don't even notice the sleep deprivation, so I'm just going to keep sleeping only 4 hours a day because I just don't feel like I need any more. Those aren't the people that are in these studies that are showing like negative health outcomes from low sleeping. It's usually it's people who are like, the majority of them, they're forced to be sleep deprived because of school and university and because of all these other lifestyle factors. So this is important because basically these studies are showing these people who are sleep deprived for whatever reason get worse health outcomes than people who sleep 9 to 10 hours a day or whatever it is, 7 to 10 hours. And let me also say the range of healthy sleep that's considered healthy, is so high and variable that it doesn't make any sense to use any kind of like specific guidelines at all. But generally speaking, these people who get better sleep in these studies, they're living a lower stress life. They're more likely to eat healthier foods because they're not like working, night shifts at a hospital where they don't have enough time to like prepare healthy meals or whatever it is. They're, usually these people on these night shifts, they're eating a lot more junk food. They're eating out of a vending machine. I've seen it working as a security guard because, at a medical building. I always saw the nurses and doctors rushing back and forth to the vending machine because, they don't have enough time and whatnot to get other foods. And this is a real thing, even if you think it's an excuse for them. But the point I'm trying to make is it the sleep that's causing their negative health outcomes, Or is it the unhealthy lifestyle? Because most of the foods that these convenience foods that these low sleep people generally reach for usually are the exact foods that are generally considered to be responsible for diabetes and the obesity epidemic or whatever. It's usually hyperpalatable foods, and these people are usually snacking on the job rather than just like, eating something healthy. And even if they do get something quick, like something to go or order food, it's usually not, what we consider healthy that would prevent these things. So basically, it's correlation doesn't equal causation. So the only studies I've seen that suggest a causal relationship between, sleeping less hours and having worse health outcomes, like an intervention trial, for example, something that can actually be worthy of proving causation, are studies where they actually put someone in a metabolic ward for a couple days and they purposely sleep deprive them of a couple hours, and they measure their metabolic rate as time goes by. Now, this, again, still is pretty tricky because, number one, measuring somebody's caloric expenditure, their basic metabolic rate, via pulse or whatever it is, first of all, is not really an entirely accurate measurement of what's actually going on. Secondarily, you would need quite a few weeks of a baseline test and consider all the other confounding variables in their normal life outside the metabolic ward that might be contributing to the variance in their metabolic rate. However, there have been studies done, I believe metabolic ward studies, where they actually showed a relatively significant decrease in metabolic rate with the longer that they're sleep deprived, basically showing that they burn less calories the longer they're without sleep. But, for one, cortisol and adrenaline, which are the two hormones that are usually released in response to low sleep, generally people believe that. Cortisol is actually mostly catabolic. So when someone has higher cortisol, typically it's a net catabolism. It breaks down both fat tissue and muscle tissue. So I don't know how you could, measuring metabolic rate, people saying low sleep will actually, make you fatter because of its hormonal effects. Well, sorry to break it to you, but cortisol has a net catabolism effect. It doesn't selectively break down muscle tissue, but then cause you to grow more fat. That's not how it works. But yeah, people don't actually, research things before they look into it. So, wrapping this segment up a little bit, basically what I'm trying to say is there's no real good causal evidence that is able to show sleep deprivation is going to, or getting less hours of sleep than is commonly recommended is going to run you into health problems. The biggest thing to look at is, number one, do I feel well rested after the amount of sleep that I get? That's the first thing. The big problem that I see, number one, is so there's actually studies that have been done on sleep deprivation. You could read about it in the book, The Expectation Effect. And basically, there's been numerous studies that basically showed it's not so much being deprived of sleep that hinders your performance and even your physiological health markers, but it's actually your perception of the sleep deprivation, how you focus on it, that can actually spike your cortisol, change your blood sugar levels, and especially it's mostly as far as cognitive and athletic performance. How you perceive that sleep deprivation is going to be the determining factor on how significantly that sleep deprivation actually affects you. So if you are sleep deprived and the whole day you're like, oh man, I haven't got a lot of sleep, I should stay at home or this or that. Number one, people who are legitimately sleep deprived to the point where it bothers them and they feel it, they're going to be less likely to go to the gym and exercise. they're more likely to be living these crazier on the edge lifestyles, working shift work or whatever it is, partying in college, and they're less likely to eat healthy. And all of those factors, independent of sleep, whether you get enough sleep or not, are going to contribute to type 2 diabetes and all these other negative health outcomes that people associate with sleep. Damn, I forgot where I was going with that. But yeah, that is the big takeaway. And how you perceive that sleep deprivation is going to determine the magnitude of overall impact the sleep deprivation has on your performance. In fact, right now I'm actually 5 days where I have hardly slept due to external factors I don't really want to talk about. But I've gone multiple days in a row where I did not sleep at all. And I do this pretty routinely during periods of my life where I'm studying really extensively or whatever it is. And most people can't even tell unless I tell them. Some days I do feel kind of like jet lagged, right? But I still go to jiu-jitsu, and usually I still submit everyone. But the more you fixate on it, the worse your physiological and psychological measures will be. So this has actually been studied. So a lot of people don't want to admit that their perception of their circumstances actually plays a bigger role than their circumstances themselves, but that's actually the case. So your perception modifies the response you get from sleep deprivation. And another thing, like I mentioned earlier in this video, is your individual amount of sleep you need each day. It's going to be individual to you and the diet that you need and all these things. So there's two reasons why I think this is an important thing to mention to people, okay? The lack of real evidence, okay? The first one is, if it's true that your perception of sleep deprivation impacts your physiological and psychological responses to it, then that means if you are a health professional, a doctor, a personal trainer, or just a friend or an influencer who runs a YouTube channel, and you're telling people that if they don't get 7 hours sleep minimum per day, then they're going to pay for it later on. Like, that's a common thing I hear. Like, I see in forums, Reddit threads and shit like that, and even YouTube comments where people are like, oh, I generally only get 5 hours of sleep a day, and I feel fantastic. But if I sleep any more than 5 hours a day, I start to feel kind of bad. And I'll see all these people roasting them in the comments saying, well, you may not feel like you need enough sleep right now, but trust me, it'll catch up to you eventually. And you're going to end up with a heart attack and Alzheimer's disease and all this stuff later on. You're going to wish you got, you try to sleep those extra 5 hours or whatever. And the fact of the matter is, I have seen so many anecdotes of people, and anecdotes are very important because they help to ground scientific evidence in reality, which a lot of people see it the other way around, but I don't want to go into epistemology right now. But basically, it's pretty common to see people like Jocko Willink, freaking Donald Trump for what it's worth, and me to a certain degree. A lot of people report only needing 5 or 6 hours of sleep a day and being perfectly fine on it. And even further, there's a lot of people out there that wrongfully assume they have insomnia or some kind of sleep disorder because they can only sleep 5 hours a day or 5 hours a night. The thing is, that can actually cause people to perceive that they have a problem that they actually don't even have, and because they think that their chronic sleeping of 5 hours a day is a problem, they actually end up not being as successful in their life as they otherwise would have if they weren't distracted by how little sleep they get and all these other factors. A lot of people suffer from their low amount of sleep, not because they actually need it, but because they legitimately don't need it, and they're so attached to thinking that they do need it. So a lot of people who naturally only sleep 4 to 6 hours a day or whatever it is, especially if they've noticed a pattern where most of the time they naturally wake up after that amount of time, and then they're fine. They're not like significantly cognitively impaired or whatever. A lot of those people will be way better off just assuming, oh, I'm just genetically adapted to, 4 or 5 hours of sleep a day, and the normal recommendations don't apply to me. But people generally, they nocebo themselves into thinking they have a sleep disorder, and then they're on all these medications, and they're doing all these different experiments, and they're stressing about it, and then they tell themselves disempowering beliefs like I can't have a normal job because of my sleep problem and all this shit. And it's like, in reality, a lot of that shit could literally be in your head, and you might not need that much sleep. So yeah, so at a baseline, we generally don't actually see real decrements in exercise adaptation and recovery from periods of sleep deprivation, provided it's not too significant and eventually you get the sleep that you need. Most people in universities, most people in college, the people that are running this sleep research now, when they were PhD students, they survived college and things like that, and they are usually the prime population of people that are known to be sleep deprived. It's people in medical school and in their PhD research. So I just find it interesting that it's really some of the highest performing people in our society tends to be the ones that generally willingly sleep the less so they can get more things done in general. High functioning business CEOs and all those people, they take like prescription grade stimulants, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them, to stay awake and get more work done and be time efficient. So I'm just throwing it out there, like, if sleep deprivation, first of all, ruined cognitive impairance, was horrible for the brain, and was something that you should absolutely worry about at all costs, like sleep is the number one most important thing, why is it that the majority of the highest functioning people in our society, not the healthiest people, but the highest functioning in our society, even in athletics, professional athletes, I routinely hear people who are like, yeah, I worked I worked 2 different jobs. I studied in university, and I had a kid, and I managed to train to become a professional athlete before I ever became, a sponsored athlete and being able to, just be an athlete. I can get paid for it. Like, I hear this all the time. Yet, a lot of people, they use this whole sleep thing. It's like, it's actually hindering them to worry about their sleep rather than the actual act of not getting enough sleep themselves. And as far as health outcomes are concerned, it's not the number of sleep that you need to worry about, it's how you feel. And some people, no matter how much sleep they get, they still feel pretty tired and sleep deprived, because a lot of times it's not the sleep that actually is making them feel tired, but it's their diet, it's their mindset, and it's these other things that are draining their energy. So there's a lot of moving parts to this discussion, and to just overemphasize sleep as if it's like the one you gotta worry about it, it's a huge thing, you're gonna die if you don't get enough sleep, you're gonna be doomed. If you don't get that 8 hours of sleep a day, then you're fucked. Seriously. If you undersleep, if you get 6 hours of sleep a day, you're probably going to be fine from a health outcome perspective, even if you feel a little sleep deprived. But generally speaking, the brain will usually adapt. Like, there's only so long you can go without sleeping before the brain forces you into sleep. Unless you're using stimulants or pharmaceutical interventions, the brain enters microsleeps. The brain eventually just causes you to pass out. There's a certain degree of sleep deprivation that you just cannot withstand. Also, severe sleep deprivation comes with it severe clinical symptoms like hallucinations and, borderline, like, just being absolutely non-functional in reality. So a lot of people, they're creating problems that don't exist. Oh, I have subclinical sleep deprivation. It's like, no, either you have clinical sleep deprivation or you don't. either sleep is hindering your performance or it's not. And I know on a biological, mechanistic level, it is more of like a spectrum and a sliding scale. But when we're talking about practical reality, 9 times out of 10, what's hindering you is the way that you deal with the cards that you're being dealt. Not necessarily the circumstances, but how you react to them. So, leave your question and comments down below. The science does not support, 6 hours a day for everyone or else you're fucked. No, it's actually a wide range of times that might be best for you, that you need to sleep per day. Those probably change depending on the day. And no amount of scientific research can tell you how much amount of sleep you need. Even a sleep study probably won't be able to do that. The same way that we can't really give wide sweeping nutrient recommendations. Depends on your diet, your activity level, your genetics. Leave your question and comments down below and let me know what you think, and I'll talk to you all next time.